Welcome to this second module for Anthropology, Introduction to Cultural Anthropology, this one on language and linguistics. For this segment, we'll have two short Gebusi video clips. One concerns the creative change of a linguistic reference over time concerning a material item in the rainforest, which we'll find out about. And the second is simply a minute or two of just casual evening conversation, what Gebusi call voila, just casual talk, conversation, the glue that knits people together. And in that case, they're talking about what kind of food they're going to distribute to who's going to get what, and just floating ideas for a feast which is upcoming in the second video clip. Then we'll step back and look at some of the larger contexts of language a little bit from two different world areas. One, northern Liberia in West Africa, and the second among the Gebusi with some larger changes over time. And these clips, this narrated PowerPoint that forms the second part of this online teaching module, will consider some of the changes of language, its relationship to politics, its relationship to multilinguistic and cultural change environments, and the way that language is a dynamic force, kind of looking through social life through the lens of language, as it were, as through the spoken forms as a route and a way into looking at worldview and larger issues of language in relationship to culture. So that forms the online teaching segment for the section on language. And after that, we'll have some questions that you can complete as the online student assignment associated with this segment. Good luck. Okay, this is a komai. This tree is called the komai. It's the name of the tree. And it's also the name of the resin that collects on the tree that they use to make torches. So I'm going to focus on, okay, okay. So you're going to chip it off. That's resin from the tree. It's hardened resin from the komai tree. And dobatoi e muvitohira. Okay. Okay, so. And this resin is what they use they wrap it in leaves and light it at night and it burns. And it's interesting linguistically because komai has become the generic name for torch. So that if you have a komai is a lantern, and when Western lanterns came in, they called them bo komai, or Western lanterns. And so the name of this tree has become the name for lantern. And the word bow, which is associated with Western, things that are traditional, if you want a Western version of it, you call bow. So if you say a tile is a bow and arrow, as a bow, but a bow tie is a shotgun. And so it's an example of linguistic productivity that you use the prefix bow as a signifier of meaning, or as we know, the smallest unit of meaning is a morpheme, to very productively attribute to different things. And it also illustrates language change over time, because now the kerosene is hard to get, so people don't have wick lanterns. They tend to have flashlights with little batteries that run out very quickly. So they use torch, which is more the Australian British word for flashlight. So torch agara would be to see with a torch. So you can see the language differences over time. So the word for komai is a tree, that comes to the resin, that comes to the lantern, and that changes over time to torch. So a little lesson in linguistics here from the komai tree in the middle of the forest.
What was still new? They get hung new name some.
Non to one near the guy to me now, for maybe now, near the Matumania to Watson. wa tu ma
ene game tu ba na ro ya ka
wa dia la
hai le na ma ni ma ne ra ku sam ko bo beki ha usga ne da beki ha ha mo ro wa ma no ni mo ge bi de ba stila ba da ba e sina do wa no mo bi ga to mo ko se so wa so nyu na mo ko se so di ga so me bi ga ni ma ene di ga wa beki ha sim do ya
su ga wa
ni ma ni beki ba ne ya me because ni bu ha ko sa mo ya kan community bi ga me community bi ane personal mana poto mo wa anyu sa ka ba ne su him sa ne pot na la dio e ma he na mu e dio era bo ke ma dia ma ta se wa dia ha san ni ha na ne
e bo ke mai ma ne na si me le ba la de ka su se ga wa namba ne ya su
ne
Greetings. Here's the online teaching segment on language in practice, Liberia and Papua New Guinea. In this segment, we'll talk about northern Liberia and start putting language into its sociolinguistic and larger cultural context. Here's a slide I took of women at a market in northern Liberia, and marketing is a context in which a lot of different linguistic aspects come together. There may be people from different countries, even this is near the border of Guinea. Some of them may be speaking French or Francophone. Liberia's got over 30 different tribal languages, although the lingua franca and the national language is English. But the intricacies of relationship in transaction between people from different areas is very important and very significant in places like markets. And one can think historically that people coming together for trade and other purposes often has led to the hybridization of different language forms, including the development of creoles, and then which then can become pidgins or full languages of contact that develop into full-blown languages in and of themselves, separate from the different groups that eventually combine to trade linguistic terms and make them up. Here's a Liberian school. You can see underneath the teacher's left arm there, the UNICEF is the donor for the school benches and for large parts of the school materials. The international context of schooling in Liberia is now very developed, given that after the Civil War, most of the schools and the facilities were totally run down. So United Nations relief organizations and many others have been developing this. And this changes the linguistic context as well. The idea of national English that may be comprehensible to outsiders, as well as in a very thick dialect of Liberian English, which has long been standard, is very significant. Liberia, as a country that was settled by ex-slaves from the 19th century, has always had English as an important language or a national language, but it's a very distinctive dialect that relates interestingly to a lot of local tribal languages as well. But in the context of schooling, national Liberian English is the language of the day and very important for those who want to get ahead in terms of education. Now here, in the same town of Colohoun, is a man who survived the Civil War in Liberia and has managed to put together a local radio station. And just using a little transmitter, about a 15-watt transmitter, you can see the wires there across his pants, and he stuck up a bamboo pole on the tallest tree in the area as a transmitting tower, and can broadcast 2 or 3 miles, perhaps at most, but enough to cover the 2,000 or so people in the town of Colohoun. And that's the schedule of all the different radio shows that he's able to transmit. He gets feeds from his boombox radio, the BBC, and other news announcements internationally. He has music and also local languages. So he has a multilinguistic environment that he's dealing with in terms of local languages, news, and English, international English, Liberian English, and you can see the combination of different linguistic forms in the tableau of schedule behind him in this very entrepreneurial, very interesting organic process of using language as a modern communication device, but in a very intricate and challenging way in a rural area of Liberia in the aftermath of civil war. Now, here are 3 judges in the town of Colquhoun whose Liberian English was so thick that I really couldn't understand it very well. It was very, little bit like if you were going to northern Scotland with very thick Scottish brogue. But they are the paragons of the legal organization in the area, and they are the magistrates in front of whom various court cases are made. But language is extremely important to them because now the legal code is being rewritten in standard constitutional English, and they are challenged through their own linguistic forms to absorb and understand that, in many cases even in the absence of updated law books, and to translate it into local terms which people can then understand, so that the tribal customs of chieftainship and power and litigation that were customary are now augmented and changed through more contemporary legal forms that they are trying to grapple with linguistically, as well as in terms of the actual legal statutes and application of them themselves. Now here's another political use of language. This is the district commissioner of the town of Colquhoun, who is a direct appointee of the president of the country, who's portrayed above him in a poster, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the first African woman elected as a democratically elected of an African state back in 1986 in the left part of the poster, and the same woman in 2005 running for office. And he has a linguistic articulation between the politics of the nation and the local translation into terms which are comprehensible to local people, and all the challenges and complications that entails. Now this is the final slide I have from Liberia, and this is an aid worker. Her name is Anita Dahl, and you can see actually in the background the edge of a piece of paper that was posted to the wall, visitation of Dr. Bruce visiting on Wednesday, etc. And my own presence was part of a linguistic dynamic which came into play. I don't speak any of the Liberian tribal languages, and this woman actually has been across to Guinea, the neighboring country, during parts of the Civil War, and has come back to be trained as a relief worker in the northern Liberian context. And so she and I were able to communicate in English, and she was trying to communicate and translate various aspects. The economy of this part of the country is strongly influenced by linguistic intrusion, as it were, because many people, in terms of the education, the roads, the health facilities, are relief workers, international folks, and those who are internationally educated, who come in and create a different linguistic environment that strongly impacts the language situation there. So that's just a little bit of background of sociolinguistics from an Anglo-centric perspective. If I was a long-term Liberian ethnographer, I would certainly be learning and have learned some of the local languages, or at least one in greater detail, to be able to see the other side of the linguistic coin, as it were, between which the external and internal dimensions of sociolinguistics meet and come together. Now, when it comes to the Gebusi, I'm in a slightly different and better situation in terms of language, because I do know Gebusi language, or at least I'm proficient enough in it to comprehend and be comprehended by Gebusi. And this segment of the presentation will cover some of the changes through the lens of language among Gebusi from 1980 through not my most recent visit, but the one before that in 2008. Now, when first arriving among Gebusi, you can imagine how difficult it was to learn the language, which had never been written before, which was no recorded aspect of language at all. These are adult Gebusi men, and you can see how difficult it is to blend in, although one would like to imagine that one is part of the local circumstance. But linguistic indoctrination, as it were, and trying to learn the language is the most important thing that anthropologists often do if they're not already in the language. Now, from the Gebusi's own perspective, the linguistic context of greeting, these are men from different settlements who are snapping fingers of each other as they enter. Those in front are from the visiting village, and those in back from the host village. Very, very important. They're yelling out the kinship names of relatives. They're greeting people. There's the possibility of a fight or some altercation, and so the performative, calling out of names names and reaffirming solidarity across kinship lines and across village lines in this context, combining the kinesthetic or the physical posturing and body form with the language is a crucial part of Gebusi association between different settlements at this early stage in my understanding of it. Now, here's a photo of the primordial Gebusi dancer dressed, and what would this costume mean? What is the deep significance of this costume? It's very, very powerful, but without language and understanding of symbolism as represented both iconically on the dancer and through language, it would be completely opaque as to what this means. This is a red bird of paradise, a man who is impersonating a spirit woman, the reincarnate form of young women who die, reincarnate as spirits that are in forms of birds. So the red bird of paradise is indicated by the red paint on the costume, and various symbolic elements which are very important indicate the different reincarnated animal and other creatures of the upper world, symbolized by the bird feathers on the top part of the costume, and then the lower world symbolized by the crocodile mouth drum, which if you were an older man you might reincarnate as a crocodile. So the interplay of symbolism and culture and linguistic representation is here very much encoded and collapsed altogether. And of course language was the medium whereby I was able to uncover and determine some of these associations by asking questions and finding out about the birds of the forest and the natural environment and so on, using language as the form of communication. And at the dance itself, women are singing off stage and are communicating in verbal linguistic terms as well, songs of sadness and loneliness, which this very beautiful red bird of paradise drummer is supposed to represent as an alluring figure of sadness and yet attraction in the kind of linguistic psychology of Gebusi dance and aesthetics. Here's another linguistic context, which by 1998 was very important. The school at Nomad had been operating even when we were first there in the 1980s, but it became much more important for the Gebusi people whom I was living with by 1998. And again, English was the national language of Papua New Guinea. There's a talk piecing variety. I can go long walkabout, long school. I can go long about long grass, which would be you can come to school and stand in the yard, but don't walk too much on the grass. That's a linguistic utterance of talk piecing, or the national language, which started as a Creole of a combination of different languages from Melanesians from their own multiple different languages trying to communicate with outsiders for trade and other purposes. And then it became a full pidgin, and then a full language of the people of Papua New Guinea. And that's a very important, we call lingua franca, or a common language across the entire country, although about 800 or so different languages speckle the landscape in cultural and social terms. Now, at the school itself, regular English of the kind that we might be able to understand is the official language and is spoken as well, although with a very different dialect of English. English in many different parts of the world, as powerful and as important it is as a global language, has greatly different inflected dialects in different contexts, and Papua New Guinea English is one of those as well. Now at the market as well, here in 1998, women who were not part of a cash economy before are the primary sellers of produce, tremendous piles of different produce here at the Nomad market. And people from several different tribal groups come together, so you might have 5 or even 6 or so languages among those who are buyers and sellers at the market all together. And they would use, in this case, usually talk piecing as the lingua franca. They might understand a little bit of English, but mostly the groups, they are bilingual in their own tribal languages or speaking in talk piecing. Now over time, and this slide was taken 10 years later in 2008, this is also a slide of the market, but you can see different kinds of items have come in as important, and a whole different generation of children now, most of whom have been to school and speak talk piecing or understand it at least, and have some smattering of English. So the multilinguistic environment has expanded to include English in a much more fundamental way at this term, at least through the talk piecing lingua franca. Even though most of these children would not be able to speak English, they could understand at least a few words of it. Now, in terms of Gebusi aesthetics on their own front, here is a singing group, and Gebusi songs have been strongly influenced by language change as well. And in the early 1980s, the language forms were very arcane and poetic, what they often called spirit talk or bird talk, very intricate forms of poetic juxtaposition that were a language almost onto itself. It drew upon Gebusi, but it had terms and phrases that were distinctive only to spirit persons who had communicated, and Gebusi would learn it over time. By 1998, this had significantly changed, so the Gebusi were no longer singing in that spirit voice anymore, but were using words that combine different languages, and in some cases even languages they themselves didn't speak, but certain words and terms to evoke kind of poignant aspects of longing and loneliness and traveling and attraction between men and women were very poignantly voiced in these songs in 1998. And I really couldn't translate them easily without finding specific words and what they meant, given that the linguistic context had changed so radically. Now, here's another very important language context at the Nomad Patrol, what used to be the Nomad Patrol Post and now the Nomad National Subject District Station, in which police who are not from the local area and do not speak local languages generally are communicating largely in talk piecing or sometimes in English to a man on the right there who's being interrogated or questioned about a criminal matter. And as a witness, he is in a situation of linguistic subordination, insofar as the power is held by the police, and you can even by the posture and the organization of the people in the room, that they are important and powerful, and he is the recipient of their discourse. And in many cases, he would be only at pains to express himself in talk piecing, much less in English. In some cases, a translator would need to be present. But in these multilinguistic environments, those who speak the local language but not the more prestigious national language are significantly subordinate or at a disadvantage. And that linguistic context is very important in communicating, and one reason why it's so important for anthropologists to learn the local vernacular, if at all possible. Otherwise, they're filtering all their information through the context of power associated largely with national government and powerful outsiders. Now, in the church and in religious terms, language is a very important dynamic as well. Here is Cyril Afanang, who's a man which was not from the Gebusi area, but from a different part of Papua New Guinea, who is educated in English and also in talk piecing, who's teaching the Bible. And you can see in the background some of the words in English and in talk piecing as he is translating, he's talking to people through a translator, and some of them are now more understanding talk piecing. And the local Catholic church that the Gebusi go to is here, the linguistic context of that is important. And in coming to church, the Gebusi themselves said they stopped, quote, going to sing to their local spirits in the spirit seances and instead have flocked to church where the linguistic communication with spiritual entities of superior superordinate power are from the outside, namely God and Jesus, and voiced through a different linguistic context. Now, over time, these linguistic phenomena of language transmission in spiritual terms have been importantly altered. Here's my good friend Howie on the left holding a church poster of the dark heart of man, whereas the pastor from another part of Papua New Guinea on the right in Gebusi area is speaking in English or talk piecing, and Howie there is translating in Gebusi for the people in the congregation. Now, by 2008, the situation had gone yet another extreme. This is my good friend Yamda, whose Christian name is Luke, and he is the lay pastor when the outside priest is not present at the local Gebusi Corners Church. And you can see in the poster in back of him the parish annual target by January 2009, very carefully stenciled. We, the parishioners of St. Paul and our friends, encourage everyone to become free person by being more honest and strengthening our relationship in carrying out the planned activities. So you can see that English has become very important. Gebusi still speak. The church service is largely given in Gebusi, except for the scripture readings, but it can be given in Talkpisin and in some cases English without too much translation, because people are more knowledgeable in these multiple linguistic forms. So the relationship between language and the understanding of an introduced Christian religion from the outside and the concepts associated with that are importantly entwined. Now, even on the sports field, here is the Nomad sports field at the Central Subdistrict Office. And this is taken in 1998, at which time there was a very developed rugby and soccer league, which pitted teams from different tribal groups against each other, and most of whom did not speak the same language. They were in many cases bilingual, but they would use Talkpisin to communicate with each other. Here's a rugby ball in mid-flight between one player and another. And you can see the crowd in the background, which could be many hundreds of people on important days, a multilinguistic and multicultural audience that traditionally would not have come together, but was together for the occasion of these particular sports events. Now in school as well, the children in a different classroom may come from 3 or 4 or 5 different tribal groups with different languages. And again, they may understand or be able to listen and comprehend the languages of the tribal group next door, but not fluent necessarily in those languages. But in the school classroom, Talkpisin and English were more the important means of instruction, particularly because the teachers themselves were from different parts of the country and did not speak the local language. Now, in terms of travel and attempts to come to terms in an active and prospective way to the outside world, language is also extremely important. Here's a man from a different tribal group, not the Gebusi, in the local town of Kiunga. And Kiunga is not in Gebusi territory. It's a several days walk away. It's a very difficult place, but it's also like the Emerald City, where there's lots of trade goods, and it's kind of seen as a magical, in figurative terms at least, and sometimes literally magical place, where these items of outside commodities are more freely available, at least to the eye, if not for actual purchase if you don't have money. But the linguistic context of when you travel and go outside your small area and your local language is not spoken is also extremely important. Now here's the final slide of this segment, and here's my good friend Didiga, who's my gift exchange for him is duama, or lizard. Our language of communicating our relationship to each other is mediated by this lizard that we saw together, and he caught it and we cooked it and ate it together. And so whenever I see him, he's my duama, he's my lizard, and I'm his lizard. So that's an example of a linguistic context of communication and association through language in a very distinctive way, in that case a gift exchange name. But Didiga is also a reader of English. He went through grade 6, and he was able to look at the first edition of the Gebusi book, which he's there holding. And this picture itself was the title cover photo for the second edition of the book as well. So Didica is definitely living in a multilinguistic context. At the same time, it's important to note in closing that the Gebusi language, unlike Native American languages and a number of languages in other parts of the world of smaller populations, is not at risk of extinction. Gebusi still speak their own language completely fluently with each other at all times on their own, and they use Talkpisin and English as supplements, sometimes with words or sometimes to communicate with outsiders, but their own language in terms of its grammatical structure, its vocabulary, is as rich and is important to their ways of life and representing their revised and changing worldview as much as it ever was in the past. Thank you.